In some ways, I think that you'll find I'm just too dumb to quit. So
Okay.
I'll usually just find the hardest thing that I can find and try for that. So
Welcome to Cocktails and Socktails,
Drink.
the podcast where we make cyber relevant to everyone and unlock the stories of our leading industry professionals. I'm Megan.
And I'm Carly, and today we have Nic McKinley. Nick is a retired Air Force pararescueman, former CIA agent, and an evil crusher, combating human trafficking through his organization, DeliverFund. Welcome, Nick.
hey, thanks for having me, Carly and Megan. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Now, so usually we ask what you're drinking, but I actually want to just highlight what you're drinking out of. Can you show
Yes,
us your mug? So, DeliverFund mug, all proceeds from stuff in your merch shop goes straight to the mission, right?
that's correct.
Awesome. Well, we're going to get into that in a little bit. But before we get into the DeliverFund, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I again, I'm Nic McKinley. I'm the CEO and founder of DeliverFund. By way of background, I was actually an orphan that got whisked away from Kansas to Wyoming, where I was adopted by an amazing family that then took me to Montana. I was raised in Montana, and professionally, I spent a little over 10 years in the Air Force pararescue teams, spent roughly the same amount of time at the CIA within a specialized unit. Education-wise, number of degrees from both the Community College of the Air Force, Harvard University, and then dropped
Wow.
out of a graduate degree at Harvard to start a venture capital-backed software company. And also, and again, I run a DeliverFund, which is a nonprofit counter human trafficking agency, and we focus on data and analytics around the human trafficking issue.
Wow. I have to ask, like, everything from like your background and like in some of like the other podcasts and things that I've listened to, and you talk about like what you've done, and like what you're doing today, especially like where do you think your kind of purpose-driven ambition comes from? I know that's like a really like big kind of ethereal question, but that was like, you know, from the military to the CIA and now continuing that service, but to the like global aspect of it, right? So,
In some ways, I think that you'll find I'm just too dumb to quit. So
okay.
I'll usually just find the hardest thing that I can find and try for that. So originally, when I wanted to join the military, I wanted to be I first wanted to be a Force Recon Marine, and then in Billings, Montana, where I grew up, all of the recruiters were kind of in one giant office with a hallway that had different offices in each one, and each service was really represented by just one office. All right, small town. And so I go in there and I walked into the Marines, and I wanted to be a Force Recon Marine, and mainly just because I'd seen a Marine Corps poster and there were some cool Marine Corps commercials, and they were just like, okay, cool, that's what I want to go do. And then the Navy recruiters got me, and they're like, oh, what about this whole Navy SEAL thing? And I was like, oh, I thought that was just a movie. Like, that's a real thing. And so then they tried to recruit me over there, and I was interested in it, but I was like, I want to be a medic. And well, the Marine Corps was like, yeah, we don't have medics. The Navy provides the medics. So then I was like, okay, great. Well, I'll be Navy, and you didn't really understand it. And recruiters aren't the most honest people in the world when they're trying to explain things to you.
You don't say.
And got to make those numbers. And so I was talking to the Navy guys, and I was pretty sure I wanted to go down that road. And the Air Force guy comes over, and he's like, hey, what about Air Force pararescue or combat control? I'm like, what's that? I'm not interested in the Air Force. That's dumb. And he's like, yeah, you probably wouldn't make it anyway. And I was like, what? And he's like, oh yeah, our attrition rates it's a lot harder. You probably wouldn't make it. And he walked back in his office like smartest thing that guy ever did. And so then I wanted to learn more. And then a couple of days later, my mom came home from something that she was at, and she was walking by some like brochure stand, that used to be in the malls in the 90s. And there was recruiting brochures there. And so she just grabbed a bunch of them and brought them home. And one of them was for the Air Force pararescue teams. And I still remember that brochure. It was Mike Maltz was on the cover. He actually later became my supervisor, and he died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan, probably close to a decade ago. But he was on the brochure, and Mike Maltz, if you knew him, like he was kind of the epitome of kind of a Captain America look, right? Real super square jaw, and he was a big dude, and so then I went back to the Air Force and was like, what about this pararescue thing? And I did that, and it was kind of one of those things where I just always wanted to do whatever was the hardest thing I could find. Not that I really necessarily thought I would make it. I just wanted to try. And I think, same thing for undergrad at Harvard. People are like, well, how'd you get into Harvard? I applied. Oh, I could never get into Harvard. Well, did you apply? Like, do you know that? Because you only know that if you applied and they denied you. And so there were lots of times where I just applied to things and I was like, I'm never going to get into this. And I was like, holy smoke, they're going to let me in.
Now what? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now I
was
have
like,
to,
okay, well, I guess
I
I got to figure out something to do while I'm here. And it was the same thing when I was in pararescue. Ended up working with some agency folks, and I was like, oh, that seems pretty interesting. I want to go try to do that. And it took me a couple tries, but then, I started working there as a staff officer after a while, and kind of the rest is history.
Awesome. And so tell us more about the DeliverFund and how you've now kind of ended here with this mission, and kind of like where I guess it birthed from and what you guys do.
Yeah, so DeliverFund was kind of an interesting, very nonlinear progression. So the way to think about DeliverFund for your audience is we're like a SOC, but for human trafficking. We coordinate and deconflict and collect data and do analytics and collect intelligence on human trafficking, and then disseminate that across state and local law enforcement and the federal government as well across the United States. So a central point of analytics and data collection for human trafficking, right? That's really the way to think about us. And it was birthed out of a case. I was in southern Afghanistan in Helmand Province with a JSOC counterpart, and I was a team leader on the ground, and we were working some explosives related intelligence cases, and we ended up coming in contact with what I call smoking gun intel on a human trafficker. And when we wrote that up, we couldn't really find any place to send it. Right. So just like in many things, right, intelligence doesn't just magically appear places. It actually has to get routed with different codes and things like that to make sure the right stuff gets to the right place. And what we found was that there was no code for human trafficking. It was essentially a miscellaneous reporting, which means, it's where intel goes to die. And that really made me curious as to who was doing something about the human trafficking issue. And what I found was that the federal government wasn't really doing much. And there's incredible men and women in the FBI and Homeland Security that are doing their best, but there's just not very many of them. The major majority of the heavy lifting in human trafficking cases goes to state and local law enforcement. And the state and local law enforcement, there's over 18,000 jurisdictions across the United States, which is essentially 18,000 different silos. Not unlike the siloing of information that you get in the cybersecurity world. And so what we had to do in order to get to the bottom of this issue here in the United States was start coordinating and deconflicting those cases. And so that's really how I got into this.
Wow. Sorry. So human trafficking, what's the difference, I guess, between human trafficking and human smuggling? Because I know they get interchanged kind of a bit, or used interchangeably. So can you,
Yes.
is there a difference?
There's a huge difference, and it really irritates me when politicians conflate human trafficking and human smuggling. They do so for political purposes, and it's intellectually dishonest, and they got to stop doing it. Most people, when they hear that we fight human trafficking, they go, "Oh, like people coming across the southern border." I'm like, no, not at all. When you look at the data, and I believe opinions are important, but data is better. And so when you look at the data on human trafficking cases in the U.S., 86% of the victims in human trafficking cases, according to DOJ prosecutions, are U.S. citizens. Almost all, like 99% of the customers, are U.S. citizens. The major majority of traffickers, like over 70%, are U.S. citizens. This is a very American problem. Are there people who are foreigners who are trafficked in the United States? Yes, that happens, but that is the exception. That is not the rule. The major majority of human traffickers are targeting preteen and teen girls using a smartphone, using cyber technologies. Human smuggling, so to kind of answer this a little more academically, the way I like to help people think about it is human trafficking is when you have a person who is being either forced, defrauded, or coerced, according to law, one of those three things, into performing some type of service or labor for the economic benefit of another person, right? So they're not retaining the proceeds of their labor. Human smuggling is when you have somebody who asks to be smuggled into another country, and usually actually pays to be smuggled into another country. Now, when they get to that country, they exist outside the system. They are then vulnerable to becoming trafficking victims, especially on the forced labor side. But smuggling and trafficking are two different things, right? Smuggling is a chosen thing. Trafficking is an unchosen thing. That's the best way to look at it.
So I want to unpack this just a little bit, because we have, when we spoke before we got together for this call, when we did our pre-call, you had mentioned what's happening at the border being clear, for the most part, human smuggling, vice, human trafficking. But I think it's important to point out that, and as you just alluded to, even though these people have opted in, when they get here, they're still being grossly exploited, right?
Correct.
Like the smugglers
100%.
bring them across. I mean, presumably, I have not been there myself, but presumably charging astronomical amounts of money, not taking care to ensure families are kept together, health, safety, all that stuff, and then essentially dumped into a situation where they don't have the resources or the awareness from a legality perspective that working for $5 to $6 an hour on a farm or whatever in horrendous conditions is actually not humane. It's not the standard, but they just
Right.
don't
They feel
have
they
a
have no other
choice.
choice. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's where it gets into these very sticky philosophical situations about, right, well, is making the only choice really making a choice, right? And we can go back and forth on that, but they're still not, for the most part, a fraud, force, or coercion piece there. They're saying, okay, well, I understand I'm going to be here illegally. I am choosing to participate in an illegal underground economy. I am choosing to only work for $5 an hour, and I'm choosing the lesser of two evils as opposed to where I came from, right? And that's why things like border security are so important, is because you don't want to create a situation where it's easy for people to exist outside the system and participate in the criminal underground. So if I tell you, hey, here's a bunch of drug dealers, and you choose to go hang out with them, you shouldn't be surprised that there's violence, because you're going into the criminal underground. And that's kind of the situation here, is that any criminal underground is just one thing. It doesn't matter if it's malware or if it's human trafficking or narcotics trafficking or human smuggling or gun trafficking. It doesn't really matter. It's the criminal underground. And so if you are in the criminal underground or adjacent to the criminal underground, you are going to experience the things that happen in the criminal underground. And so that's why it's important that there are barriers to entry into the criminal underground, and you make it difficult, and you make it so that it doesn't seem easy. Because when it seems easy to participate in the criminal underground, then people are like, oh, well, how bad can it really be? And then they incur those consequences. Many times those are completely life-changing.
And I feel like, I don't know why this like particular instance or this particular example like really just like tugs at my heartstring. Maybe because I was an adolescent girl once and it's like really hard anyway. And I feel like you throw yourself into a situation where you didn't have a lot of options. You take something that was smuggling and now becomes exploitation. It's just like the line just seems so like ripe for crossing.
It's very blurry. It's very blurry. And there's a lot, and that's where we get into things like, child exploitation and the hands-on offenders of child exploitation, where there's no economic incentive, right? That can be charged with trafficking, but academically, is it really human trafficking? It's very, very evil, but it's the same thing when we talk about, say, on the cybersecurity side, right? There's a big difference between remote access and physical access. And you have to acknowledge that they are different in order to effectively combat them. Well, it's kind of the same thing when we talk about child exploitation, human smuggling, and human trafficking. They're academically different things. And so we have to acknowledge that they are different things because they are fought in different ways. Now, there's a lot of overlap, right? The Venn diagram has a lot of overlap in those circles, but for the most part, they all have a cyber signal, and it's a different cyber signal. And there's a different motivation, right? In human trafficking, it's money. In human smuggling, it's obviously money. But in child exploitation, it's oftentimes gratification of the user, and there's not necessarily money involved. So even though there is a power incentive structure there, and so understanding the kind of nuances really helps us be able to fight them in various ways. So if you want to control human smuggling, is a great example. That's very easy to do. You just control your borders like that. That's indisputable. Human trafficking, well, that's much more of a cyber signal. That's less of a physical initiation into the market. So you have to control cyberspace, right? Controlling borders doesn't really reduce human trafficking. Versus child exploitation, I actually don't really know the best way to fight child exploitation, because that's not my area of expertise. But the Internet Crimes Against Children and centers and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children are doing a good job there.
I would like to go back to one thing you said about that this is a very American problem. Do you think that it is truly an American problem, or is it that we don't have the means of the signal collection, OCONUS? Like, is it just simply that perhaps the mechanisms to collect the telemetry don't exist, or that there might not be the motivation from a political perspective for other countries to, develop a means to gather that telemetry?
Sure. So when I say it's an American problem, I mean it's an American problem in America. Right.
Okay.
So your trafficking that happens in, say, Germany is not a German problem. It's primarily Eastern Europeans and Asians that are being brought into Germany. In Italy, it's primarily Africans that are being brought into Italy. So that's what I mean by it's an American problem. Is that in America it's an American problem. When it comes to cyber, signal collection, I mean, that's what we do at DeliverFund. We have the largest, cleanest, and most deduplicated database on potential human trafficking activity in existence. We collect about 67 million points of interest a month, over 3 billion points of interest currently. I mean, we truly are doing some big data stuff. We have two supercomputers, two high-performance computers that are crunching all of this. So we do all of our own math on-prem. So it's really like we understand the data side of this very well. Now, in America and most westernized countries, your trafficking signal is primarily cyber, but that doesn't apply to, say, Vietnam and Cambodia, where your trafficking signal is primarily going to be on the street. So that's why it's so important that we don't just paint human trafficking with one broad brush and throw a bunch of stuff in there, because the what we do to fight human trafficking in America doesn't necessarily work in Cambodia, definitely doesn't work to the same level in places like Mexico or Colombia, but will work to the same level in Canada and Germany and France. So understanding the differences in the market is really important.
So you, with the signals that you're collecting, and you mentioned that it's a lot of preteens online that are getting trafficked. And I think when we talked the other day, it's like 90+% are endangered runaways who have been groomed online. What
Correct.
does that look like? What kind of signals is the DeliverFund collecting on?
So we pull off of commercial sex advertising sites. There's over 30 sites. This is just on the front-facing internet that there's over 30 sites. Many of them are regional. And so we pull signal from every one, from all of those sites at varying intervals. And then there's deep web data as well that is applicable. There's not a lot of trafficking that happens on the dark web, contrary to popular belief, because think about it this way: there's not a lot of customers on the dark web. You probably know how to get on the dark web because of your job, but most people, it's a good question.
No.
So, do you guys know how to get on the dark web? Either of you?
I actually do not.
Okay.
Personally. No.
So,
I mean, I understand it I don't spend a lot of time on the dark web, but I understand it to the extent of like you have to have like the specific IP destination that you're headed to, and then you probably want to use an onion router or something.
You have to use one of those.
I don't want to like sound authoritative on this.
But this
yes.
is my point. So here you are, two cybersecurity professionals with very, very limited knowledge on how to get onto the dark web. So the plumber who thinks that he's just going to get a date with a prostitute for an hour on his way home from work has absolutely no idea how to get on the dark web. And not to mention that it's very difficult to get on the dark web from a mobile phone. And that's where most people are engaging in this. And so, but that just kind of shows my point on why there is not the predominance of human trafficking that happens on the dark web. I'm not saying there isn't any. There is human trafficking that happens on the dark web. It's just, again, it's exceptions. And we always tend to look at these exceptions like, oh, well, this young child was abducted and trafficked. That's really sad. But that's 0.0001% of the problem, right? It's 1 in 10,000. So in America, your child has roughly the same chance of getting struck by lightning as they do being abducted by a child or by a stranger. To your point about the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children data, 92% of their cases are endangered runaways, which is a fancy way of saying most likely somebody groomed them online over a period of weeks to months and then convinced that child to run away from their support network, which may or may not be a broken home, may or may not be parents that are checked out, who knows, but convinced that child to run away into the arms of the trafficker. Now, the child thought that they were going to have a great weekend in Maui, or they thought that they were going to run into the arms of somebody who was going to shower them with gifts and love. But the reality is they run into the arms of a predator. And I've had people push back on me saying that, oh, predators and human traffickers are different things. No, that is just not true. Human traffickers are societal predators. Mm-hmm. That is, terrorists are societal predators, right? So like I have spent my entire career, around, targeting cyber or not just cyber, but societal predators. So we understand these kinds of issues very well. So when you look at that data and you go, okay, well, wait a minute, if yes, we still do need to teach our children stranger danger and things like that, but we also need to help them understand that that person that they say is their friend on social media is not necessarily really their friend. It may not even be who they think they are. So I want you to think of this. So I was raised with 3 sisters, so I know how this works. All right. Young preteen girl wants to wear a mini skirt to school or the mall or whatever kids do these days. And dad says no. I mean, that's about as common as it gets in about every American household. It used to be preteen girl goes to her room, listens to some, sad music and writes angsty words in her journal. And like, that's what it is. I mean, am I wrong here?
No.
No. So what happens today?
They go on a rant on social media.
Yeah, she goes to her room, makes a TikTok video about how she's mad at her dad because he won't let her wear the mini skirt. She advertises her vulnerability to the world. And the predators go, oh, look at that. And then the predator slides into those DMs and says, oh, that's just because you're so pretty. Your dad is trying to keep you from growing up, and says all the things that she wants to hear. And does that over a period of weeks to months. And then the next thing you know, she runs away into the arms of the guy that she thinks is going to solve all of her problems, who says that he's, 21 when really he's 36 and lives 3,000 miles away. And so what these things have done, these smartphones, which are just broadband connected microcomputers that are in everybody's pockets, and then algorithmically, we have made it very easy for predators to find the prey that they are looking for. And so it used to be in my day growing up, creepy guy on the wrong side of town. Everybody knew who he was. Parents knew to keep their kids away from him. Now we've given the creepy guy on the wrong side of town access to every child in America with a smartphone, and the algorithms within social media actually help them find that prey. And then for the human trafficker, it's a numbers game. So just to kind of make the math easy here, right? You think about how much did you pay for your, insert social media account. Chances are you didn't pay anything for it. So we've removed the barrier to entry. It's extremely low. You just have to have a smartphone and an internet connection, and you can actually get both of those for free in some circumstances. Mm-hmm. So the barrier to entry to this market is extremely low. Now, all that trafficker has to do is create a, insert social media brand, create an account, and then go connect with 100 preteen girls. And for the trafficker, the way they look at this is that it's essentially a sales funnel. They've got to contact 100 to get 50 to agree to talk to them, to get 30 to have a conversation with them, to get 15 to have a meaningful conversation with them, to get 5 to agree to meet up, to get 2 to actually show up. And that costs them nothing except for some time in talking to and grooming and manipulating these young girls. And it is young boys too. It's predominantly women and girls.
And it's crazy.
Sorry, go ahead, Carly.
No, I was going to say, because even if somebody, and unfortunately younger kids today aren't fully taught, like, okay, it's a bot account, or this is probably not a real person, so go block, report, delete, whatever. But they can just turn around, create a new one, create a new one, create a new one. And it's just a cycle. And like you said, then it's just that numbers game, and it's persistent, really.
Right. So every cybersecurity professional I know worth their salt has just a cabbage patch of sock puppet accounts that they use for various entities. Right. I like to call them the fake book accounts. Well, if we don't. Never would we do that. Meta, because you're listening. So never would we do that. But let's just say we did. Then how much easier is it for traffickers to do that?
Right.
Because they have nothing but time. So give me the data behind when you say they have nothing but time. So give me the profile, the data that you have on like the average person that you have found that has been, caught or incarcerated or whatever the case may be. Like, what's the profile of a predator?
So let's go back to kind of pre that question, and then we'll go to that question. This will make a lot more sense. So between I believe it was 2010 and 2015, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children found that they had a 846% increase in suspected child trafficking cases. When you overlay smartphone adoption rates and the Facebook app, which was the first kind of real social media app to get significant market traction, what you find is that there's almost a one-to-one correlation between the adoption of those technologies and the increase in suspected child trafficking cases. So who is your predator? Well, these days it's somebody who is technically pretty proficient, right? It's somebody who knows how to use social media, knows how to get the social media machine, the algorithms, to work in their favor, and they know how to manipulate and exploit another person. Now, they do that through either fraud, force, or coercion. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it always ends up in force, right? That's always the end goal. But the beginning is usually fraud, right? So it's that contacting that 14-year-old girl, pretending like you're a 16-year-old boy. You get her to send that picture that she regrets, and now she's being sextorted, and then that sextorted can turn into trafficking. So that's kind of the way that it ends up working. Now, from a profile perspective, it would be great if there was a like common profile. There are a couple of things that we're just not going to talk about publicly because we just don't want that fight. But there are, other than that, there's not really a profile. I mean, if you just scour the news, you'll find there was a United Airlines pilot who was convicted of being a human trafficker, who was like literally running, brothels. There was a big brothel bust that just happened in Virginia and Boston, and it was what appears to be some Chinese nationals who were running the whole thing, or maybe Vietnamese nationals. It's hard because there's culturally Chinese parts of Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. And so, but either way, it's like, okay, well, here you have this essentially Asian organized crime ring. And then in like Appalachia, you have your traffickers are, predominantly white, predominantly meth adjacent, on the West Coast, and then on the far East Coast, you're looking at the Northeast Coast and then the Southwest Coast. You're predominantly looking at gang-related activity. And then in between Flyover America, you have what's called the Memphis model of pimping, which traces its roots back to Memphis, Tennessee, back to the 60s and 70s. And that's predominantly what you see through there. So there really is no profile, and that's kind of part of the problem, in that trying to essentially profile trafficking activity by profiling the trafficker usually ends up with a negative result. But if you follow the cyber signal, because the Achilles heel of any business in this day and age is that they have to advertise online. Nobody can really exist besides government services. Nobody can really exist without having some type of advertising footprint online in the modern economy. And that's what we exploit. So we take those advertisements that those traffickers put up, and then we aggregate them at a very, very high scale, the largest scale in the world to our knowledge. And then we look for signal within those. And so, the traffickers will use burner numbers, right? And most of those burner numbers, they just attribute to bandwidth.com or someplace like that, right? They don't really attribute anywhere. But so, have you ever done any offensive cybersecurity operations in your career?
No, I have not.
Man,
no.
you guys are missing out on the fun stuff.
I'm a compliance person.
We're
boring
both
as it gets.
compliance born and raised. So
all right. So offensive cybersecurity operations, right, are just basic just spy operations.
And,
we're familiar with like what it is, all that, but just
everybody
never any
who's done it
hands-on.
loves it.
Yeah.
It's the
So what?
fun stuff.
It's the super fun stuff.
Yeah.
So what I'll tell you is that, like, as a former professional intelligence officer, we used to screw up our burner phones all the time. And there's various reasons why that ends up happening, but a lot of it is just, human complacency. So if we screw that up, how often do you think your average human trafficker screws it up? And we operate off of the 1% doctrine, which of counterintelligence, which basically means that if you set up your system properly, if your adversary makes one mistake, right? They're perfect tradecraft, 99% perfect tradecraft, and 1% of the time they make a mistake. They put down their real phone number. They take a picture with some type of attributable information in there, right? They make some type of mistake. You exploit that mistake, and you then use that to connect all of the other 99 points, all of the other past activity. That's what we do. So we'll have people say, "Well, Nic, how can you tell publicly, like, what kind of information you're pulling on these traffickers?" Well, it's because we create a Hobson's choice for the trafficker. Right? If you're familiar with chess, the Hobson's choice is when you set up the chessboard in such a way that no matter what your adversary does, they will end up eventually in a checkmate, and you will win. They have no good choices. And so the Hobson's choice we create for the trafficker is, if you advertise online, we are harvesting data at a level that allows law enforcement to find you. If you don't advertise online, it's actually going to be really hard for us to find you. It's going to be very hard for them to make money because all of the customers are online, right? And the whole reason they're doing this is to make money. So you see the dilemma and the predicament that we've created for them. And when you look at the market economics of human trafficking, it's kind of like, it's the same thing in cybersecurity, where you just create so much friction and risk for the threat actors in cybersecurity that only, kind of all the low level folks just go away, right? And they go target the old grandmas, and they aren't trying to target JP Morgan anymore because it's just too hard and they don't get anywhere. And the risk of getting caught is too high. So you essentially deny that territory to them. Well, we do the same thing for human traffickers, where we have commercial partners who use our data to deny the territory of their platform to human traffickers. And if you think back to your economics education around supply and demand, we know that if you increase the deadweight loss in a market by adding negative externalities to that, right? So a fancy way of saying you add friction and risk to the market, then we know, I mean, it's not even up for debate anymore. It's a well-established science that is what actually reduces demand. And so that's why we take the approach that we take in helping law enforcement figure out who the traffickers are, helping industry partners figure out what the signal is. And then we even have an app, HT Safeguard, that you can download from the App Store, that allows your average mom and dad to be able to check the phone numbers and the email addresses of the people in their child's network against commercial sex advertisements. And so it's now about using data and analytics to enable everybody to fight human trafficking.
Are you allowed to share some of the common sites that these people advertise on?
Absolutely. But we don't want to, because one, you have to assume that there's underage, kids that will be listening to this, and then that'll just direct them where to go.
Sure.
Two, we don't want to direct people to what is very, very graphic material, unfortunately. And that's one of the reasons.
But it's not like mainstream, like you're not going to find it as like a pop-up ad at the bottom of like a mainstream news site or anything like that. Like
You might. You can find this stuff if you just start looking. If you start Googling certain words, you will find this stuff inside of 2 minutes. It's that easy.
So it correlates obviously then with the algorithm, the things that you're searching for. It's like a feedback loop.
You start seeing those advertisements, it's probably because you've been looking for other things.
I'm at the point, honestly, I can't talk about anything with my phone in vicinity where I'm like, and I don't, I'm a tech professional, whatever, and I don't want to turn it off because like sometimes it's useful. I'm talking to my husband about deck chairs. Next thing you know, Amazon's sending me deck chairs. I kind of like it, but then there's another side of it that's like, nah, it's, privacy. But I'm not doing anything nefarious, right? So it's whatever for me, but that's ultra interesting. And I think it's like, very telling for anyone that might be listening that hadn't considered that, obviously. We have just a little bit of time left, and I can't get out.
There's so many more questions
without.
Go for it.
I know there's so much I want to talk about, but the primary thing as a mother, and I'm gonna, hijack this with my mom brain for just a second. For me, I sort of have a sense of what to do. We had a podcast episode that Robert was on that we talked about, Cyber Dads, talked about securing the home front, right? What can we do as parents to be vigilant, knowing now the statistics around these, a huge portion of these victims are runaways. What can we do? I mean, obviously, other than like love and cherish our children, what can we do to be vigilant at home? Like, what apps should we be looking for on mobile devices? I mean, what can we do on the home front?
So the first thing is be a good parent. Right. You said love and cherish your children, but that's just part of it. Part of it is helping your children understand that this is real and that if something like this happens, it'll be life-changing. They need to bring it to you and that they're not going to get in trouble. They sent a photo that they probably shouldn't have sent. They're not going to get in trouble, that you're there to help them solve that problem. And you're there to be their advocate. And so it's also very important that parents do not, get upset with their kids if their kids make one of these mistakes, because if your child doesn't feel confident bringing this to you, then you've kind of lost the battle. So that's the first thing, is just be a good parent. Help your child understand that this is very real, and then help them understand what to do about it. The second thing is help them really understand that what they see on the internet is not necessarily real. Right? That anybody can be anytime, anybody can be anything they want. And a lot of people look towards parental controls. I don't really like that. Obviously, at a certain age, yes, parental controls are good, but we have to eventually allow children to go out into the world, and we don't want them to suddenly go from parental control to like a free world when they're in college or wherever it is that they go. So we need to, I like the term parental intelligence, which is just about helping parents understand how the system works, and then helping them to understand how to not only educate their child, but then how to collect the intelligence that they need. So one of the reasons that we launched our app is you can find all the data that's in our app. 100% of it is open source, PAI information, right? Publicly available information. You can find it through Google if you wanted to. But it would, instead of taking you 3 seconds, it would take you anywhere from 3 minutes to sometimes 30 minutes to find that information. And then it would take you to some very graphic websites, and you would be exposed to that graphic material. So I recommend everybody with an iPhone, and this will be coming out on Android soon, at some point. Our engineers are working on it. But you want to have that app, because if somebody slides into your kid's DM and says, hey, hit me up on this phone number on WhatsApp, you want to check that phone number against our information. And if that phone number comes back positive with connections to commercial sex sites, then you've got a problem and you need to cease all communication. If it doesn't, that's not an excuse to drop your guard. But this is just, again, it's the first step to vigilance. And then from there, it's just, knowing, helping your children understand how to communicate online. So, maybe your daughter's talking to somebody online you wouldn't necessarily want them to. You could either stop them, or you can walk them through how to make those decisions and say, oh, well, tell me about the conversation. Oh, really? The guy said that? Well, that doesn't really make sense because of this, and this. So maybe go back and ask this question. But it sounds like this person may not be who they're saying that they are, right? And teach your children how to decipher for themselves what is right and what is not, obviously in an age-appropriate way.
And from a not well, I'm a dog parent, but my dog's got too much anxiety, so nobody's gonna try and steal him. But as cybersecurity professionals, like, and or cybersecurity companies, like, are there things that we can be doing to aid in the fight? And because I know we've like talked a lot about kind of this nexus of cyber and human trafficking, and so how can cybersecurity professionals and or companies assist, if that
So
makes sense?
there's a strong correlation connection between cybersecurity and human trafficking, primarily on the bad guy side, right? So the same hackers in Romania who are, selling malware tools or even writing malware tools are the same ones that are providing, you're building the security for some of these, like say webcam sites or some of the advertising sites that are actively trying to keep us out. But at DeliverFund, our engineers are better, so you guys take that. And like no matter how many paywalls you put up, we're gonna get around them every time. So
Nice.
so we pull that data in, but then we make that data structured and queryable for really anybody who needs it. So we have fintech companies who use it. We've got insurtech is interested. Hospitality companies are interested. One of the biggest hospitality short-term rental companies is using our data to screen bad guys out of their platform. And it's the same thing with cybersecurity. So any cybersecurity company who wants to integrate our data, we make it very cheap and easy for them to do that. And then it essentially becomes a filter, right? So you've got a handle of a hacker that is trying to get into your system, and they're pretty persistent. And then it turns out that same handle is associated with a social media account that's associated with a commercial sex advertisement. Okay, well, that's a pretty darn interesting place. And so because the commercial sex world and human trafficking, specifically in westernized countries, has had so little risk and so little friction, they tend to really drop their guard on that side. So that just becomes yet another source of data that becomes really good at targeting. But let's face it, most of cybersecurity is just about screening the bad guys out in the first place, right? You want to keep them from ever getting in. So cybersecurity isn't just about keeping hackers out. It's about keeping narco traffickers out. It's about keeping weapons proliferators out and money launderers out. And there's data sets in order to help with all of that, even though they're not as robust as we'd like them to be. Well, we're that human trafficking data set that helps to keep human traffickers out. So when you look at the upfront screening that we all try to do, right? That's your first defense against any type of cybersecurity incident, is that upfront screening. Well, we provide the data to industry partners in really all industries that help them screen human traffickers out of their platform. So it doesn't matter if you're in cybersecurity for like you guys Microsoft, or you're in cybersecurity for a fintech payments company, or cybersecurity for a bank, or cybersecurity for an insurance company. The integration of this data not only keeps the company safer, but it also makes that company off limits to criminals, so that it reduces the liability for the company.
Well, I was also going to say, it sounds like if, let's say this tool was used from like an HR screening perspective, then this is bringing in folks who are not meeting their moral and ethics codes within the company. And then an insider risk indicator,
Yes.
especially if you work for a large company or a fintech company, potentially as far as being exploited from if you are the buyer per se.
Right.
So
And so
it's
where that data is legal in the HR side, is probably going to be different in different jurisdictions. But as long as it was used under obviously proper legal guidance, you're exactly right.
So to what extent does DeliverFund, do you have any, I would say you're going to provide this telemetry to companies that want to opt in and help in this fight. To what extent do you provide, I would say, kind of help understanding SOC operators how this data integrates into their existing operation? Meaning like, destination or other IPs, like how they might ingest those into their own like incoming signal and make sure that there's fidelity around them?
We find that each operator is different, and so we work with them hand in glove to help them, one, understand what the human trafficking problem is, where their liability sits. We have training that we provide to companies where, you know, they kind of meet their fiduciary requirements for training their staff on what human trafficking is, right? Just a 30-minute down and dirty human trafficking 101, computer-based training, and then within the SOC community, help them understand, okay, well, this is most likely where your exposure is, and here's some best practices based on what some other customers in your specific industry do, right? Because let's face it, I remember when I was in grad school, one of the leads for cybersecurity at JP Morgan was in my grad school cohort, and he was explaining to me some of the risks that they face, and they are considerable, far, far greater than any risk like we would face at DeliverFund. And so we work with each one of those individual companies to help them understand where their footprint is, and they usually get it pretty quick, and then they know the engineering of their system, so they can say, oh, we're just going to integrate this data here and here, and we're going to automate that. We script updates to them so that they're getting the latest data, and everything just kind of works.
That's amazing. We're running short on time, and I'm running short on daylight. I don't know if you guys can tell. Like, I sit in front of a window, and I didn't consider with the time shift. This is the first podcast we've recorded with the time shift that, like, I would actually be fading. It would be going dark on me. So hopefully I'm still visible.
You're still sunny disposition. It's brightening up your screen.
Nic, what is the footprint of your organization? How many bodies does it take to keep it running?
Right now, we have 13 full-time employees, a host of contractors that help us out, a host of industry partners as well that are vendors for us that help us out. We've got about just over $3 million budget that we have to meet every year, and that is about 80% donor funded. So we need the donations. We need people pitching in. Not everybody is called to fight human trafficking all day, every day, but everybody can help make it useful. And the information that we have and the data and analytics that we have, as well as the embedded bodies we have. So we actually have analysts that are embedded in law enforcement, human trafficking task forces that are doing analytics for those human trafficking task forces. And all of what we provide to law enforcement is free of charge.
That's amazing.
That's fantastic.
I'm so thankful there are people like you out here doing this work. I can't even. We talked about before coming together that I'm not even sure I'm going to be able to get through this topic as a mother of 3 young children. This is just such a scary reality, and it's like working in cyber from day to day. I'm very aware of the threat side of things, but it's like taking it to another level to bring it to this point where we can talk about these things. So I'm so grateful
that
you're out here doing this work.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's my honor and privilege, but the cybersecurity operators can think about it this way, right? Instead of it being a cyber hacker that's trying to get into your system, this is a human hacker that's trying to get into your kid's head. And then they're just trying to manipulate your kid's brain, right? Your kid's computer to their financial ends. And so that's why it's so important that we all participate in the fight against human trafficking and bring these traffickers to justice and protect our kids.
And I think that conversation is important because, like we've kind of talked about and you've mentioned, it's not the dark web only. It's not snatching children off the street in America. It's not, international travel. Like, something that came to my head before was the training that I got at DoD is when you travel, be vigilant about human trafficking.
Right.
But
right.
what about when I go to what about when I go online to check my Instagram? So it's very, and then you've got movies like Taken that have that human trafficking element, but it's that exciting 1% of the problem that is being highlighted versus the true problem is very mundane, which makes it not as whatever sexy to talk about, but that is what we need to talk about, is that being vigilant daily in our everyday activities online. And so
Human
thank
trafficking in
you.
America is not taken. It is not Sound
Yeah.
of Freedom. It is not the Born Identity. It is none of that stuff.
No.
It is, horrible human traffickers, horrible, quite frankly, demonic human beings who are using smartphones to communicate with your child and to groom them and manipulate them into participating in their trafficking business. That is the reality of human trafficking in America. And what we don't need is, my whole career was action guy with guns, right?
Yeah.
Jumping at airplanes and all that stuff. I got 30 combat deployments under my belt. I know as much about kicking doors in combat as anybody alive. And that's not what fights this in the United States of America. We don't need special operators going and kicking doors and to help law enforcement. Law enforcement doesn't need that help. The help that law enforcement needs is targeting and finding out what door to go kick, finding out who the human trafficking victims are, who the human trafficker is, and collecting the information that's needed. It's not an action guy thing, right? And that's why at DeliverFund on our store, we have these T-shirts that say "From Shooters to Computers," because that's one of the things that I realized in my work was that the weapon in this fight is not a gun; it's a keyboard. And so that's why I learned how to use those keyboards and learned how to use those skills to go after human traffickers.
I want to wrap this up by calling out, I would say most of our listeners are Microsoft people at this point, because, we're a small podcast, start small, then grow from there. But
right.
If you are a Microsoft employee listening and you have listened up to this point, you can find DeliverFund in the Benevity portal, where you get corporate matching for donations if you feel led and called to donate. I think this is a significant mission that, if you're considering donations, especially upcoming in the holiday season, that this is significant and important cause. Nic, how else can people support your cause?
You can find us at deliverfund.org if you want to learn more about what we do. If you want to talk about data partnerships, you can find me at nic.mckinley at deliverfund.org. I'm also on LinkedIn and all the social platforms at the.nic.mckinley. And really sharing this information. Donating is obviously key. Data partnerships are extremely important, but at a bare minimum, sharing this information, following us on social media, making sure that you're sharing this information with your friends and they're following, because we do a lot of work to dispel myths around. Human trafficking is not a zip tie on your car. It's not a water bottle on your car. It's not somebody following you through Whole Foods. Like that. That's not real. It's not this adrenochrome, weird conspiracy theory stuff. It's human traffickers targeting your children online through social media, day in and day out. And that's what we fight day in and day out.
Awesome. Thank you. And we'll link everything in the show notes. And I think the last question I want to ask, we do a typical rapid fire. And your segue into conspiracy theories. I only have one, but your segue, and you said conspiracy theories, so have to ask, as a former CIA agent and everything you know and do, Pizzagate and the Wayfair theories, true or false?
Complete crap. Completely false.
Awesome. Well, he goes deeper into that on some other shows, so you can find him. Just put in Nic McKinley in Google, YouTube, Bing.
Bingle.
Bingle everywhere. Bingle. That's what we like to say. Put his name into YouTube, put his name into Spotify, and you'll get tons of different podcasts that he talks about this and debunks all the conspiracy theories. So thanks, Nic, again, for joining us and sharing your experiences and the amazing work that DeliverFund does, and your thoughts about this nexus of human trafficking and cybersecurity. So yeah, don't forget to go check out DeliverFund's merch store, because all proceeds from merch go to their mission. So thank you again.
Yes, thank you so
Very good.
much.